This big old lump is the wiper motor from the car, and you have a rod that goes in here which is operated by the switches inside the car, which makes your connection in here, and some cogs and things happen, and then your wipers work. Except ours don't work very well, and that's because the grease in here is all dried up. I'd also quite like to give this a clean, get the paint redone, make it look a bit more presentable. I'm not the first person to go in here either. Oops. There you go, that's some of the mechanism in there, and all this white here is all very dried up grease. It's gone like window putty. It's not good. So all of this needs cleaning out, and this needs re-greasing, because what's happening is as soon as you have any resistance from the wipers on the screen, it's overpowering the motor, because it's having to fight against this grease as well, and the wipers they're not able to work properly. So I have to very carefully dismantle all of this, keep track of where everything goes, clean, re-grease and reassemble, and we should be okay. The wiper motor does work properly. We have had the wipers working, but the more testing that we did on the car early on, the slower and slower this got. I'll just see if I can pop this other piece off here and see what we've got in there. Wow, that's great. And also very soft. As has been the case with many of the screws on this, just age and the fact everything's flathead screws, you have to be so careful. I'm going to have to use some penetrating fluid or something on these. These are very well stuck. I'm just going to go handheld for a moment here to show you this section. So this is where the wiring goes, and your two little holes here, two wires pop up, go in here. You then have grub screws, and the wiring for the wiper motor, I think from the harness, runs to here. I'll know for definite when I look at the car. And I pop the cover off, and that gives you a look at the actual motor in there. The brushes are nice and free moving. Everything in here is moderately clean. It's not as bad as I was expecting. It has that very particular smell that old electrics have. I don't really know how to describe it to you. It's yeah, it's a strange smell. But there is some dirt in here that needs cleaning up. That's not ideal. Also, this piece appears to be Bakelite, and somebody's painted it. So I'm going to have to do my best to get the paint off that, because that does not need to be painted. I'm hoping that crack there isn't a problem. I didn't have to use any force to take this off, thankfully. It came off very easily. And I don't think this is greased. I think this is supposed to be dry, with the exception of just the little drive there. Probably has just a little bit of oil put on to help with the bearing. And that seems to be set with this little screw here that goes in the end. So we shall see. I'm not sure on that. I'm going to find my penetrating fluid and deal with these ones next, because I think I'm probably going to have to pull kind of everything out to clean this up properly, which is a little bit of a nuisance, but that's how these jobs are sometimes. Because of all the paint, it's easy to miss fixings. So I've got the little gasket off here, which just goes on this edge behind this plate. And I noticed there were a couple of screws which hold that section onto there. So we've undone those, and I have the wheel box now completely off, so I can dismantle and clean this up separately, which is fantastic. You can sort of see some of the grease here as well. It is just rock hard, and where it isn't, it is just like putty. It's the strangest thing. So I don't think that's helping. I think I am going to have to unfortunately take this case off to get in there and clean everything out. I suspect it's just going to be the commutator in there. And of course your worm drive here, screw drive thing. So it might not be that bad under here, but it would make painting this a lot easier if I could get in. But for now, let's very carefully that's not too bad. Oh yeah, that's not great. It looks like it might have had an attempt at being greased, because there is a little bit of fresher looking grease on this, but most of it is just, again, this putty stuff. And it's pretty unpleasant. These aren't keyed, they're just plain shafts that go in there, so again that makes my life a bit easier for reassembly. But this grease here looks fresher, but still not great, so we'll definitely be replacing that. And then just a case of cleaning everything. I think I'll put this in the ultrasonic cleaner. That's probably the easiest way to do this. It's very, very good at shifting build up like this. But I don't think there's anything else to come out. I'll know better when I give it a clean up. I think this is just one solid casting of aluminium. I think this is one piece, and the big cog down there is the other one piece. So let's get these cleaned. Get this one soaking in some penetrating for those screws, and see where we end up. After quite a bit of effort, I got all three of these out. Now it looks like somebody's had a go at these before me. There is damage to all three of them. But I've got some little files, so I will do my best to dress these up before they go back in. That means that this central cover is theoretically now loose. I have no idea how it comes off. I have to assume that it's a slide fit over the aluminium body. So how best to do this? Every tool's a hammer. Well, that took a little while. You sort of have to tap on the lip here until it starts to come up. Then you end up with a gap here that you can pry with a screwdriver, and then once you can get your hands in, you sort of wiggle it and wiggle it and wiggle it, and eventually it pops off. Now, it is quite dirty inside. There is some corrosion in here as well, so I think it was worth taking off because I can get that cleaned up now. It'll also be a lot easier to paint this. This is just a piece of steel, so I can dunk this in the paint stripper and then paint that afterwards, being sure to mask off the inside, of course. Inside you can see, again, there's some corrosion here. Now I'll be honest, I don't really know how this works. My goal here is to clean things, make sure there's the best contacts there can be wherever any are visible, and check for any obvious signs of damage. The most obvious thing I see is these steel pieces here and here, which seem to connect to the inside of this by friction, have surface rust on them. that's probably not going to be the best connection that they could have. There's no sign of any oil or paint in here, so I think this should just be bare metal, and this middle section here is cast aluminium, which is also these parts here. So I'll be cleaning the paint off the cast aluminium, and I will leave that bare. I think that'll probably be the best option. The windings, what I can see of them, look okay. There's no obvious signs of corrosion. The other interesting thing is I thought this might be held in with something in here. It's not. It's completely free moving. So all I need to do is move the brushes out. I can push the commutator out and then clean up inside there as well. Again, just make sure that all of our contacts are as clean as possible and free of corrosion, because our biggest problem with the electrics on this car after the old wiring issue has just been corrosion on connections. So anywhere I can eliminate that is a good thing. Just a lot of cleaning now, really, more than anything. Every time you touch anything, your hands are just filthy immediately. But that's 70 odd years of build-up of dirt and use. It's just part of old cars. I'm actually glad I took this apart now. You can see there's some surface corrosion on here that needs dealing with. It's not too serious, but it's certainly going to affect any sort of connectivity that it's got. There's no serious scoring or pitting on here, which is good. The windings look in really good shape actually, which isn't that surprising considering how well they're protected. There's this gummy old grease on here which needs doing, but visual inspection at least, this just needs a bit of a clean like everything else. Inside, and the arms for the bushes just unhook from here, which is great, makes it easy to remove. There you go, you can just see here there's a line of dust of some sort, which is probably carbon from the brushes, and you can just make out a little bit of corrosion in here as well. So I'll give this all a good clean out with some electrical cleaner and some extremely fine emery paper. We're talking like 1500, 2000 grit. Just to get all of this surface muck off here, get everything nice and clean before we put it all back together again. And that should help functionality a lot. There's no obvious wear on the bush down here. More dried up grease of course, but we'll sort that out on reassembly. It all seems pretty good, to be honest. And hopefully when it's all cleaned up and put back together, it'll work a bit better. It's taken a little while, but I finally have everything all cleaned up. Lots of this sort of thing, and cotton buds and fine sandpaper. The commutator cleaned up really nicely. I don't really have any concerns there. The grease on this end of the screw though was pretty annoying. These drive cogs are again in very good shape. The teeth are in good shape. I'm not seeing any excessive wear or issues on there, so I'm happy about that. One thing I wasn't thrilled about, the crack that was in here when I looked before cleaning. As the dirt came off, so did this piece of Bakelite. I had a bit of a look online. The suggestions seem to be equally: to repair Bakelite you use superglue or you use epoxy resin. I use superglue in this situation because I didn't want any bulk of the adhesive getting anywhere, and the superglue I have is a nice thin one, and that seems quite secure, so I'm happy with that. What caused it is, you can just see as the light catches it there, how it's sprained. In the past somebody's tightened that up too much and it's just cracked the casing. Not sure why you would tighten that up far enough to do that, but somebody did. All the paint is off this now as well, as much as I can, so it feels a lot nicer, it looks a lot nicer, and everything is a lot cleaner and ready to go back together. In here you can see that's a lot better now. There was a lot of carbon dust in there, presumably from the brushes, and some grease down here at the end, which was awkward to clean out because every time you push something in from one end it pushed out the other, and yeah. I've been very careful with the wires here. I don't want to snap these, I've left this attached because if I remove that, then I'm looking at having to unwire things like this, and there's no need to go that deep in this job. This is just a case of tidying things up. Dealt with the surface corrosion on here, a little bit of marking from it, not too terrible though. All of this is aluminium except for these pieces, which seem to be steel, I think, and the bushes of course, which are either brass or bronze. So there's a lot of different metals going on. It's very heavy, but there's no need to paint any of these aluminium sections. I'm just going to leave those plain as they are. I think that will look perfectly fine. The brushes and the mechanism here are in good shape. I see no reason to replace the brushes. They're not worn down to a point where they're not going to work. There's still plenty of life in them. And the components you can't see here, the horseshoe piece that goes over here and the snout that holds the gears, they're just in the paint stripper at the moment just to get the old paint off so I can put some fresh black paint on those. I've got everything dry fit here, just loosely assembled, just to make sure everything is as it should be. I have rotated these round. This is now nice and free moving. It's a bit tricky to show you at the moment, you'll have to take my word for it obviously. Got all the paint off here. That looks much smarter than it did. I'm happier with that. Got all the paint off the aluminium casting at this end, so that looks a lot smarter. And that will age just nicely in the car as well. I got as much of the grime and the paint off here as I could, but I didn't polish it back to a shiny bare aluminium. I've left some of the discoloration in here. If I make this look too new, it's going to look out of place on the car. The other thing is, after sanding these as much as I could to get the knobbly bits off, I've given it all a coat of rust converter, except for the inside. I've left this just bare metal. This is how it was when I took it apart. I've cleaned off the surface corrosion that will come off, but there is some discoloration to the metal. You have to draw a line somewhere with things, and that's where I've drawn it with this one. Once this is fully hardened, I can sand it all back, and then I can give this a coat of proper paint. The surprising one was the end plate here. Before, the rust that was all over the middle, I could just about see the paint at the bottom, and that was it. What I couldn't see is all this text here telling me what model it is, what voltage system it's for. I'm guessing that's a production stamp of some description. So that's nice to see that back. That will look a lot smarter when that's all painted and back on the car. As with the big bridge piece here, and that just kind of slots on there, this will get a scuff sand back before I prime and paint that. Started off with Halford's just red oxide primer, then a coat of Halford's matte black. This stuff's brilliant actually. If you're after a matte finish where you don't want to put a varnish over it that doesn't fade and doesn't go watermarked, this stuff's really good. However, I didn't want a matte finish on these. I wanted a decent satin finish, so I've gone with Rust-Oleum's Crystal Clear. It's a slightly heavier satin, it leans more towards gloss, but that's great because with it going over a matte, it knocks that satin down again. Weird thing with finishes and paint. And this gives a pretty close factory finish, which I'm quite happy with. I was a bit worried these were going to look a bit too new and a bit too clean, but there's quite a few little imperfections showing through, so I'm happy about that. And the end plate here, you can make out the text on it when the light hits it just so. So I'm happy with that too. I did make sure to mask the surfaces that need to be bare metal. So the back of this is protected by the grease that's inside the unit. You don't want paint on there because if it flakes off, it's going to end up inside and could cause problems. Likewise, this piece is masked off inside. I did spray it upside down so I could get these edges here first and then turn it the right way up, supported by a pot covered in masking tape. This is a neat little trick. it means you can use any sort of pot that you've got that's the right size, and if it's something like this where you don't want it covered in paint, it just protects it, and that just sits on there so I can spray paint it. I'm going to start off first by pushing this home. It should go on a lot easier than it came off because, well, there's no rust to contend with. I'm not fighting the penetrating fluid that was all over everything, and yeah, it should just slide on. You've got 2 screws on one side and 1 screw on the other, so you can't really get it the wrong way round. I don't know if there's a reason for it being like that. There probably is. There we go. Slot straight on, and you can see your screw holes line up. I need to just clean up the head of these. The slots aren't in the best shape. I mean, this is probably one of the better ones, but I just need to file those a little bit so they're a bit easier to do. This one's quite bad. There's almost no depth to that at all now. But you already get a look at how that's going to look, and that's a lot nicer than it was before. I've already assembled this end, so you just carefully thread these through these 2 holes here. And then through this hole is the back end of the commutator, which is your little worm gear poking out there. And I found it was easiest to put this aluminium casing on first, then slide the commutator in, and then put your gears in. Everything slotted together a lot easier that way. Once you've got your commutator in, this can then be pushed home. It's a little bit of a fiddle over the spring and arm mechanism for the bushers. I can't really show you on camera because, well, as you get it home, this gap closes up and I physically can't show you what's happening. But you just have to very carefully ease it on. If you're getting resistance with it, just ease it back off, check everything's aligned properly, and ease it back on. If you force it, you will break the Bakelite. This stuff is quite strong, but it's also quite old, so you do have to be a little bit careful. I'm going to have to be very careful when I actually screw this down because of the previous attempt by somebody where they'd over tightened this one. When you push the commutator home, this is where the worm drive comes out. I've just removed the cogs here. They're just friction fit, so you can just pull them out. Easy peasy. I'm going to screw these screws down here to get this all lined up properly, and I'm going to load this with grease before putting these in. I think that's going to be a little bit easier. It will make sure that this drive here is well greased too, and it will just make sure the bushing here is lubricated, which is what we want. I'll tighten this end down too, and that will be the main body of the assembly done. Only so much I could do with these. 2 of them turned out pretty good. 1 has almost no material to work with, so I'm just going to have to be super careful when I put these back in the body. I'll also give these a blob of paint by hand once they're in. But before I do those, I'll do these ones. I'm only going as far as they feel like they need to be tight. There's a point where you just feel a little bit of resistance, and that's when you know they're done. Any more than that and they'll probably crack the Bakelite, which we do not want. There isn't always a need to really make things super tight. I think this one on the end here as well is for oiling in here, but for now I'm just going to screw it in, and I'll investigate that later to make sure that if it does need oiling, I oil it. These are a little bit tricky. These are the wires. Oh, I said that and that went in really easily. They pop down in there, and then the wiring from the harness on the car goes in here and is clamped down with these little grub screws. This is the awkward one. There we go. Right, let's pop these side ones in. Wherever possible, I try and start things off by hand, because these are steel screws going into aluminium castings, which, yeah, you don't want to be cross-threading things. Just slightly misaligned on this one. It's also important with flathead screws you get the screwdriver that fits best. If it's a sloppy fit on the screw head, you're likely to chew up the screw head, which obviously you don't want to do. There really isn't much left of the head on that one. But hopefully I shan't have to go back in here for any reason. And then the drive end. That's those two in, the one on that side, the two on that side, and the three on this end. I suppose four including that one. Next step is some fresh grease. Just been making use of a lolly stick to load this up with some grease. This is a lithium based grease, which I hope is the right one for the application. And put the small cog in first. And a bit more grease on that. And pop the big one in. Go. Now when I opened this up last time there was grease on the top as well, so I'll just repeat that here. I can't imagine there's such a thing as too much grease in a mechanism like this, providing it's fresh. which this very much is. There we go, that should be enough, I hope. I'm just going to wipe the surface off where the gasket goes, just in case. I'm reusing the old gasket because this is a fairly thick grease and I can't see it leaking out everywhere really. Right, I'll finish tightening this up and then we can test it. Everything's all greased up. I've already done a quick demonstration off camera just to check my work. So I've taken the plate off here so you can see it working. Uh-oh. I got a bit excited.
Take two.
Take two! So here we go. That's operating nice and smoothly now. Much better than it was before. I'm very happy with that. I'm not going to run that too long directly off the battery, but I'm confident that can go back on the car and then we should have working wipers, all being well. Hooray!